We think of justice and we think of wrongs being righted. We think justice, we think fairness, we think getting what we deserve. And what we find after Jesus was arrested was that he would go to trial. And we think, well, good, that's where justice happens. Now, as a matter of fact, Jesus didn't just have one trial, he had three trials. He was tried before his own people. Their Supreme Court was known as the Sanhedrin. And then he was tried twice by different precincts of local Roman rulers. Um, so we're thinking somewhere in those three trials that he would hopefully find some justice, but that's not what we find. Actually, we read in Mark 14, the chief priests and the whole Sanhedrin were looking for evidence against Jesus so that they could put him to death, but they did not find any. In other words, the sentence preceded even the charges, even the evidence. There was a verdict reached, and that verdict was guilty, and the punishment was decided, and the punishment was death, and they hadn't heard a witness yet. So they didn't even have a charge. So there's no justice in front of his own people, but his own people have to pass him along to the Roman court system because they are under Roman rule and they don't have the authority to issue capital punishment. So they turn Jesus over to Pilate. Pilate's kind of hoping he can pawn him off to Herod, who happens to be in town, but Herod sends him right back to Pilate. And this is what we read in Luke 23. Pilate called together the chief priests, the rulers, and the people and said to them, "You brought me this man as one who was inciting rebellion. I have examined him in your presence and have found no basis for your charges against him. Neither has Herod, for he sent him back to us. As you can see, he has done nothing to deserve death. Therefore, I will punish him and then release him." But the whole crowd shouted, "Away with this man! Release Barabbas to us!" Barabbas had been thrown into prison for an insurrection in the city and for murder. Wanting to release Jesus, Pilate appealed to them again, but they kept shouting, "Crucify him! Crucify him!" For the third time he spoke to them. "Why? What crime has this man committed? I have found in him no grounds for the death penalty. Therefore, I will have him punished and then release him." But with loud shouts, they insistently demanded that he be crucified, and their shouts prevailed. So Pilate decided to grant their demand. He released the man who had been thrown into prison for insurrection and murder, the one they asked for, and surrendered Jesus to their will. In other words, in the next trial, Jesus is actually found innocent and still receives the capital punishment. So if we're looking for justice for Jesus, we're going to find that there is none. Meanwhile, he is mocked by the soldiers, the Roman soldiers, who are holding him there. We see this, they put a purple crown or robe on him as a mockery of his supposed kingship, and twisted together a crown of thorns and set it on him. And they began to call out to him, "Hail, King of the Jews!" Again and again they struck him on the head with a staff and spit on him. Falling on their knees, they paid homage to him. And when they had mocked him, they tore off the purple robe and put his own clothes on him. And then they led him out to crucify him. And he was scourged as part of that punishment preceding crucifixion. So oftentimes after someone who was destined for crucifixion was scourged, they wouldn't have the strength left to carry their own cross, as we see in the case of Jesus, and they sometimes wouldn't even survive the scourging because it was brutal. And so Jesus encounters mocking. Ironically, he's being mocked for what his true nature really is, which is the king. And yet he bears it. So if we've ever felt slighted, if we've ever felt like we've been the victim of injustice, if we've ever waited for a wrong to be righted in our life and not found the resolution that we were hoping for, what we take from this is that Jesus has been there. There is no part of the fully human experience that Jesus has been exempt from. He has experienced the full range from birth to death. He's even experienced being the person in the grave, just like he's been the person at the graveside weeping for a friend not too long before this story. And so he has been there. He's experienced everything that we have, but what we find is that Jesus submitted to this willingly, knowingly. And so while Jesus looks like he is the victim of forces beyond his control, what we find is that the victim is actually in control. The victim is actually the author. Now we have to ask ourselves, why would the author write so much pain into his own story? Because when we look at the evidence, we see that we need Jesus desperately. There is nothing that we can do to save ourselves, and we deserve death. But Jesus doesn't actually need us. Jesus is perfect in community within the Trinity. He is eternally powerful, able to create, unchangeable, immutable, all-powerful, not in need of anything from his creation. He's perfectly satisfied in himself. So why, again, would the author write so much pain into his own story? And I think what we find is that the reason he does it is so that he can demonstrate very clearly and gloriously his own glory as evidenced in his great love for us. In other words, Jesus willingly submitted to the suffering and the pain and the injustice so that he could win the justice he deserved for us because he loves us. Now, we know that he knew this was coming because it's prophesied, and that prophecy was inspired by the Holy Spirit. So in other words, Jesus was actually author of the prophecy as well. And this prophecy happens all throughout the Old Testament, but what I want to read is a little bit from Isaiah, who was prophesying about 700 years before Jesus would be born as a baby and face crucifixion as an adult. And so I want you to think, and I want to close this way, I just want you to think about the injustice that's happening and the fact that Jesus chose this purposefully, willingly. He's going to bring about a kingdom marked with love by meeting fear and hatred with peace and love. He's going to satisfy the justice that we deserve by meeting pride with self-sacrifice and humility. So just listen to these verses, and that's where I want to leave you today. This is what's written about Jesus. I have offered my back to those who beat me, my cheeks to those who pulled out my beard. I did not hide my face from mocking and spitting. Because the sovereign Lord helps me, I will not be disgraced. Therefore have I set my face like flint, and I know I will not be put to shame. Looking forward a little bit. See, my servant will act wisely. He will be raised and lifted up and highly exalted, just as there were many who were appalled at him. His appearance was so disfigured beyond that of any human being, and his form marred beyond human likeness. So he will sprinkle many nations, and kings will shut their mouths because of him. For what they see, or for what they were not told, they will see, and what they have not heard, they will understand. Surely he bore our pain and bore our suffering, yet we considered him punished by God, stricken by him and afflicted. But he was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was on him, and by his wounds we are healed. We all like sheep have gone astray. Each of us has gone to our own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. So as we prepare to celebrate Easter, we can't skip over the experience of Good Friday. And I just ask that you'll meditate on those words along with me this morning as we wait to hear again from Pastor Doug in just a few more hours.